Westminster, King Charles may have just ended a prime minister's career, with a mere 26 words. No speech, no interview, no public appearance, just one carefully worded statement that has shaken the foundations of Britain's political establishment. For anyone who still believes the monarchy holds no real power in 2025, the last 72 hours have proven otherwise. It began with an extraordinary moment no one saw coming. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, visibly frustrated, launched a rare and pointed public attack on the king. The precise details of his remarks remain under scrutiny, but one fact is beyond dispute. He crossed a line that generations of British leaders have respected without question. For the first time in modern history, the monarch chose not to remain silent. Within 24 hours, Buckingham Palace moved swiftly. Late on Monday night, King Charles convened an emergency meeting, behind closed doors, away from Parliament and the press. Present were his most trusted advisors, the Lord Chamberlain, senior privy councillors, and constitutional lawyers. According to a palace aide who spoke on condition of anonymity, the king was clear and resolute. The Prime Minister has crossed a line no leader should ever cross. The monarchy must now defend its dignity and its survival. Those words, reported to have been spoken in the privacy of the king's study, spread through political circles like wildfire. By Tuesday morning, Westminster was in a state of near panic. What came next was unprecedented. The king authorized a full constitutional review, a move not seen since the abdication crisis of the 1930s. The initiative, reportedly titled Operation Sovereign Integrity, examined every legal mechanism available to the Crown should a sitting prime minister threaten the institution itself. It was a bold and unmistakable signal. The last time a monarch took such action, a king gave up his throne. This time, a king was preparing to defend it. Inside Downing Street, the mood shifted from disbelief to quiet alarm. One senior aide described it bluntly. He realized he'd started a fight he couldn't win. But the palace wasn't done. Early Wednesday morning, sealed letters were hand-delivered to three key figures: the leader of the opposition, the Speaker of the House of Commons, and a senior Supreme Court justice. Their contents remain undisclosed, but palace sources say the message was unmistakable: protect Britain's constitutional balance. It was not a suggestion. It was a royal warning, written, deliberate, and historic. Within hours, the existence of those letters leaked, and the public reaction was immediate. Social media erupted. Hashtags like Now King Strikes Back and Defend the Crown surged across platforms. The narrative had shifted. This was no longer about Starmer's anger. It was about a monarch reasserting authority and a nation rallying behind him. Then came the turning point. On Wednesday afternoon, the BBC interrupted regular programming for a special bulletin. Buckingham Palace was releasing its first official statement. Newsrooms fell silent. Across Britain, millions stopped what they were doing. The king did not appear on camera, but the words that followed were measured, precise, and devastating in their simplicity. His Majesty remains committed to the unity and stability of the nation. He holds deep respect for Britain's democratic institutions and expects the same respect to be shown toward the Crown. 26 words, enough to reshape the political landscape overnight. The palace didn't name the Prime Minister. It didn't need to. The message was unmistakable. Disrespect the monarchy, and there will be consequences. Within minutes, broadcasters were calling it the most powerful royal intervention in modern political history. Analysts were stunned. Constitutional scholars rushed to interpret the implications, and the public, overwhelmingly, sided with the Crown. By Thursday, the reaction had spilled into the streets. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, holding placards reading, "Stand with the Crown" and "Defend our King." Police were forced to erect barriers as the demonstrations swelled. Across the country, church bells rang spontaneously in towns and cities, acts of support, not coordination. From Manchester to Birmingham, even in traditional Labour strongholds, many expressed disgust at Starmer's remarks. One taxi driver from Manchester captured the national sentiment in a viral clip viewed over 5 million times. "You can argue about policies all day long, but you don't insult the king. That's not politics. That's betrayal." It struck a nerve, because at its core this was no longer a partisan dispute. It had become something deeper, about respect for an institution that, for centuries, has bound this country together through crisis, conflict, and change. And now, that institution had quietly, unmistakably reminded Britain and its leaders that it still commands power. Inside Downing Street, Keir Starmer watched his government unravel in real time. Every attempt to regain control failed. Press officers issued clarification after clarification. None of them worked. Starmer himself tried to steady the ship through interviews, but each appearance only deepened the crisis. The harder he tried to justify his actions, the weaker he appeared. And while Starmer scrambled for footing, his opponents seized the moment. Nigel Farage went live on Thursday night, composed, assured, and unflinching, praising what he called the king's quiet strength. "When our institutions are under attack," Farage said, "silence is not weakness, it is strength, and the king has shown strength today." The studio erupted in applause. Overnight, Farage's approval ratings surged 12 points. Reform UK's donation portal crashed under the weight of public support. Even on the conservative backbenches, whispers began that perhaps it was time for a complete change in direction. But the real drama was unfolding behind closed doors. Reports from within the Labour cabinet painted a picture of chaos. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner was said to have stormed out of an emergency meeting after a fierce confrontation with Starmer. She urged him to issue a public apology. He refused, insisting that retreat would signal weakness. Witnesses claim Rayner looked him squarely in the eye and said, "You've made yourself the enemy of the people, and you're dragging all of us down with you." In that moment, Starmer reportedly went pale. He realized this was no longer a communications crisis. It was a battle for legitimacy itself. And in Britain, no prime minister survives a war against the crown. Not in 1936, and not now. By Friday, the numbers told the story. A YouGov poll showed 80% of Britons believed the king had acted rightly. 68% said Starmer was unfit to continue as prime minister. Trust in the Labour government had collapsed to its lowest level since taking office. Within hours, junior ministers began resigning, 3 by Friday afternoon, citing a loss of confidence in Starmer's leadership. Senior officials in the cabinet office quietly began contingency planning for what they termed a caretaker government, a phrase Britain hasn't used in decades. Even civil servants, typically neutral, expressed private concern that the government was becoming unstable. Through it all, King Charles said nothing. No statements, no interviews. His silence became his greatest weapon. Each photograph of him, calm, collected, resolute, made Starmer's panic seem more desperate by comparison. On Friday, the king appeared at a charity event in Scotland, smiling, shaking hands, speaking warmly to attendees. Not a single word about the turmoil in Westminster. Commentators began calling it the art of invisible dominance. The king was winning, without lifting a finger. The international reaction was equally stark. CNN called it the most dramatic royal political confrontation since George III. European newspapers ran headlines such as "The King Speaks Without Speaking" and "Britain's Constitutional Crisis." Even the Canadian Parliament issued a statement reaffirming its respect for the monarchy. Diplomatic language, but unmistakably a rebuke to Downing Street. By the weekend, Starmer's authority had disintegrated completely. Labour MPs were openly discussing leadership challenges in the corridors of Parliament. Signatures for a vote of no confidence were piling up. Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, and senior backbenchers were reportedly holding private meetings to plan the transition. The machinery of the party, once loyal to Starmer, had ground to a halt. Then came the moment that stunned Westminster. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the crisis began, King Charles summoned the Speaker of the House and senior Privy Councillors to Windsor Castle. No cameras, no press, a private consultation. Afterwards, the palace released a single sentence. His Majesty has been apprised of the current situation and remains dedicated to the preservation of constitutional order. Those final words, preservation of constitutional order, sent shockwaves through the establishment. It was the kind of phrasing monarchs use before taking decisive action. A reminder that the king still holds reserve powers, rarely used, but very real. Analysts speculated whether Charles was preparing to dissolve Parliament, or even to back a caretaker government if the situation worsened. Either way, the message was unmistakable. If the government couldn't restore stability, the king was ready to act. Inside Labour headquarters, the atmosphere had turned poisonous. Party veterans accused Starmer of steering Labour into an identity crisis from which it might never recover. Leaked audio from an internal meeting captured shouting matches. One MP shouted, "He's turned Labour into a Republican experiment, and we're all paying the price." Another voice responded, "We need to act now before he destroys everything we've built." And through it all, the king remained silent, dignified, untouchable. As Starmer's government burned, Charles simply waited. He didn't need to fight. He didn't need to shout. Because in Britain, the crown doesn't compete. It endures. And that quiet endurance, that calm authority, has proven far more powerful than any political speech. What we're witnessing is not just a political scandal. It's a constitutional reckoning, a shift in the balance of power between Parliament and the palace not seen in generations. The monarchy, long dismissed as symbolic, has shown that it can still move mountains when provoked. And the man who thought he could challenge it now finds himself watching everything he built collapse in real time. So the question is, what happens next? Will Keir Starmer step down before he's pushed? Can Labour survive the fallout? And will the king be forced to use his reserve powers if the government implodes completely? One thing is certain. The story isn't over. Britain is on the brink of a political transformation, and history is being written before our eyes.